Today, everyone talks about standing up to racism. Social media posts, hashtags, PR statements. But what happened when there were no cameras? Rolling and speaking out could destroy your career forever. These Hollywood legends didn't wait for trending hashtags. They fought when it was dangerous, not fashionable. To most people, Clark Gable was the ultimate movie star, the king of Hollywood. Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. But in 1939, on the set of Gone with the Wind, Clark Gable saw something that made him furious. The studio had segregated bathrooms for black cast and crew, and instead of brushing it off like most white stars would have, Gable threatened to walk off the film unless they were integrated. He didn't ask. He didn't negotiate. He said, "I'm not doing this unless it changes." And it changed. Earlier in 1935, Gable had refused to attend a premiere at a whites-only theater in Atlanta until they let his black co-star, Hattie McDaniel, through the door. She was barred anyway, but Gable made sure everyone knew he was against it. This was the face on every poster in America, using his power to fight a system that made him rich. Most actors wouldn't even say the word segregation. Gable was demanding integration. By the 1970s, Marlon Brando was more than an actor. He was a force. The Godfather had made him immortal. Every studio begged for him. So when he won the Oscar for Best Actor in 1973, everyone expected a standing ovation and a grateful speech. Brando didn't even show up. Instead, he sent 26-year-old Apache activist Sachin Littlefeather to walk on stage in his place. She stood there trembling in traditional dress and told a stunned room that Brando was rejecting the award in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. You could hear the silence crack. This wasn't a press statement behind the scenes. Brando hijacked the biggest stage in Hollywood to call out the industry itself. The backlash was instant and brutal. He was mocked, ridiculed, blacklisted. People in the audience booed. John Wayne had to be physically restrained backstage from going after Littlefeather. Clint Eastwood made racist jokes at her expense, but Brando didn't flinch. He had already defended the Black Panthers, supported civil rights, and marched with Dr. King. Brando was loud, messy, unpredictable, but he used his fame to fight the system that created him. Unlike most of his peers, he didn't just risk roles, he risked the room. Paul Newman wasn't just one of Hollywood's most iconic leading men. He was the blueprint for cool, piercing blue eyes, rebel swagger, classics like Cool Hand Luke and Butch Cassidy. But what made Newman different wasn't how he acted on camera. It was how he acted when the camera stopped rolling. While other stars stayed silent during the civil rights movement, Newman was loud and unapologetic. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 and helped fund voter registration drives in the South when doing so could still get you killed. Newman didn't just talk about justice. He wrote the checks. Literally. He donated millions over his lifetime to social justice causes, education for underprivileged communities, and civil rights groups. Newman once said, "You can't be as rich as I am without redistributing some of it." In 1964, when black students at the University of Mississippi faced violent backlash for trying to integrate the school, Newman quietly paid for legal fees and safety measures behind the scenes. No press, no credit, no fanfare. His company, Newman's Own, funneled 100% of profits into philanthropic causes, many focused on racial and economic justice. It wasn't performative. It was who he was. And unlike celebrities who dipped in and out of activism depending on headlines, Paul Newman stayed consistent decade after decade. Things got even more dangerous for Joan Seberg. This French New Wave actress wasn't your typical Hollywood star. She wasn't polished like Grace Kelly or safe like Doris Day. She was unpredictable, political, and unafraid. Best known for Breathless, she became an icon overseas. But back home in the US, the government saw her as something far more threatening. A white woman who stood with black liberation. At the height of her fame, Joan Seberg began supporting the Black Panther Party publicly and financially. She didn't just write checks from her mansion. She showed up. She gave statements defending the Panthers against media attacks and described FBI surveillance as modern-day lynching with paperwork. She was fearless, but the FBI was ruthless. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau launched a personal smear campaign against her as part of their COINTELPRO program. They planted fake stories in the press, including a lie that the father of Seberg's unborn baby was a Black Panther member. The media ran with it. Her mental health crumbled. Her child died shortly after birth, and Joan never recovered. The FBI later admitted to the psychological operation, but by then the damage was done. Seberg's career faltered. She spent her later years battling depression and paranoia. In 1979, she was found dead in the backseat of her car in Paris. The cause was ruled suicide. She was only 40. Joan Seberg didn't get honored with Lifetime Achievement Awards. She didn't get a Hollywood ending, but she stood up when it mattered, when it was risky, when it was dangerous, when it was lonely. Even though they tried to erase her, she remains one of the bravest white women to ever stand beside Black America. Tony Curtis was old Hollywood's bad boy, Bronx accent, matinee idol looks, rebel streak, and the charisma to match. From Some Like It, Hot to Spartacus, he rose through studio ranks with charm, talent, and street smarts. But what set him apart wasn't just his looks. It was his refusal to play along with Hollywood's quiet racism. In the 1950s and 60s, Curtis didn't just avoid segregation. He actively challenged it. He refused to play in Southern theaters that banned Black audiences. And when Universal Studios tried to cut actor Sidney Poitier out of a film for being too controversial, Curtis said no. He insisted Poitier stay in The Defiant Ones, but he didn't stop there. Curtis made sure Poitier got equal billing. He even threatened to walk off the project if the studio didn't comply. That demand wasn't just rare. It was nearly unheard of, especially coming from a white star at the peak of his fame. The film became a major success. Both actors were nominated for Oscars, and it marked a turning point for Black representation in mainstream Hollywood. But Curtis didn't do it for accolades. As he said later, "I knew what it was like to be treated like an outsider. I was a poor Jewish kid from the Bronx. I wasn't going to sit back and let Hollywood treat Sidney like that." Tony Curtis never marketed himself as an activist. He wasn't on podiums or in marches, but he used his fame to open a door and made sure it stayed open. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a movie star. She was the movie star. From Cleopatra to Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, she ruled the screen with diamond-studded elegance and scandalous charm. She had the eyes, the marriages, the headlines, but behind the glitz, she had a spine of steel. In the 1950s and 60s, when most white Hollywood stars distanced themselves from controversy, Elizabeth Taylor did the opposite. She embraced the people the industry tried to silence. One of her closest friends was Sammy Davis Jr., a Black entertainer who faced constant racism, death threats, and ostracization just for being successful while Black. When studios and social circles tried to keep him out, Taylor welcomed him in. She defended him publicly, invited him into elite spaces, and never once flinched. But Taylor's activism went deeper than friendship. She became one of the earliest major stars to raise awareness about HIV/AIDS, a crisis that hit Black and brown communities hard. While politicians stayed silent and celebrities stayed scared, she led the charge. She helped found AMFAR and donated millions of her own money to fight the epidemic long before it was considered safe to care. She wasn't political in the traditional sense. She wasn't marching in streets. But her loyalty to Black artists, her refusal to let racism define her circles, was revolutionary for a woman in her position. Jane Fonda could have played it safe. Daughter of screen legend Henry Fonda, born into privilege, Oscar-winning actress, cover girl, America's sweetheart. She had it all and could have coasted. Instead, she became one of the loudest, most radical voices in Hollywood. Most people know about her anti-Vietnam War activism, Hanoi Jane, the controversy, the headlines. But what often gets erased is her long, committed fight against racism in America, especially when most white celebrities wouldn't touch the issue. In the late 60s and 70s, Fonda aligned herself with the Black Panthers, the American Indian movement, and grassroots organizers fighting systemic injustice. She marched for civil rights, visited Native reservations, openly criticized the prison industrial complex, and backed up Black activists being targeted by the FBI. She didn't just speak out. She used her money, her fame, and her platform to amplify others. When Angela Davis was arrested and facing the death penalty, Jane Fonda was one of the few white celebrities to campaign hard for her release. She helped raise bail, went on national television, and refused to let it fade from public memory. Hollywood didn't reward her for it. She was blacklisted, labeled a traitor, attacked in the press, but she didn't care. Decades later, Fonda is still marching. And while she's since been embraced as an icon, let's not forget back when it actually cost something to fight back. Jane Fonda paid full price. Robert Redford was classic Hollywood, blonde, blue-eyed, effortlessly handsome, and bankable from the moment he hit the screen. But behind that movie star exterior was a man who believed Hollywood had a race problem and did something about it. Redford rose to fame in the 60s and 70s with blockbusters like Butch Cassidy, The Way We Were, and The Sting. He could have played it safe, just cash the checks. Instead, he built something bigger, a pipeline for stories that weren't being told. In 1981, Redford founded the Sundance Institute, a now iconic platform that gave independent filmmakers, especially women and people of color, a shot at the spotlight. He wasn't just funding films, he was reshaping the system. Sundance launched the careers of countless underrepresented directors and actors. But even before that, Redford had been quietly challenging the norms. He supported civil rights movements, pushed for diversity in hiring behind the scenes, and routinely called out systemic racism in interviews without ever turning it into a PR stunt. He once said, "Hollywood's problem isn't just who it puts on screen, it's who it leaves out." He believed representation wasn't a trend, it was a responsibility, and he used his power to create space where others could thrive. James Garner was never the loudest man in the room, but when it came to justice, he didn't need to raise his voice. From Maverick to the Rockford Files, he played the cool, unbothered underdog, the guy who didn't chase trouble but didn't run from it either. In real life, that was James Garner to the core. In 1965, when civil rights leaders called on America to march in Selma, Alabama, Garner didn't just send thoughts and prayers, he showed up. He flew himself to Montgomery with no entourage, no press team, and marched shoulder to shoulder with Martin Luther King Jr., Harry Belafonte, and thousands of protesters, knowing full well it could destroy his career. At the time, studios wanted their stars to stay neutral, but Garner didn't believe in neutrality when people's lives were on the line. He said it plain, "I'm a human being before I'm an actor." He didn't make a brand out of activism. He didn't do it for clout. He did it because it was right. When asked if he had any regrets about his political stances, he said, "I'd rather be out of work than out of conscience." He wasn't flashy. He wasn't radical. But James Garner was real. And when it mattered most, he didn't just talk the talk. He walked it all the way through Selma. Shirley MacLaine wasn't just a movie star. She was an era. With a career that stretched from The Apartment to Terms of Endearment, she was known for her quick wit, fearless roles, and unapologetic attitude. But behind the charm and Oscar nominations was a woman who didn't just talk about justice. She walked straight into it. In 1964, at the height of the civil rights movement, MacLaine traveled to Mississippi during Freedom Summer, a dangerous time when activists were being beaten, jailed, and even murdered for trying to register black voters. Most white celebrities stayed far away. Shirley MacLaine moved in with a black family that had been targeted by the Ku Klux Klan. She wasn't there for a photo op. She was there to live it. She shared meals, endured threats, and stood side by side with civil rights workers while the Klan burned crosses just miles away. During the chaotic 1968 Democratic Convention, she spoke out against police brutality on the floor, while others hid behind agents and PR statements. Hollywood didn't always know what to do with her. She was political, loud, unfiltered, but that was her strength. She used her platform to shine a light where others wouldn't dare. Gregory Peck will always be remembered as Atticus Finch, the soft-spoken, morally unshakable lawyer in To Kill a Mockingbird who stood up to racism in a small southern town. But here's the thing, Gregory Peck wasn't acting. On screen, he played the man who defended a black man falsely accused of assault. Off-screen, he lived by the same principles long before the movie ever hit theaters. Peck used his fame to challenge racial injustice and stand up for civil rights, not just in interviews, but in boardrooms, on stages, and even in courtrooms. In the 1960s, he openly supported the civil rights movement, marched for equality, and gave public speeches condemning segregation and hate. He even helped fund legal defense efforts for civil rights activists arrested during the Freedom Rides. In 1963, Peck delivered a scathing televised speech against racism and anti-Semitism at a time when most white actors wouldn't even say the word race. He also went head-to-head with the studio system, fighting to keep the moral message of To Kill a Mockingbird intact, even when executives wanted to soften it for middle America. When Southern theaters tried to ban the film, Peck called them out publicly. Even decades later, when he was already a Hollywood legend, he continued to speak out, supporting affirmative action and calling racism the cancer of America's soul. Gregory Peck didn't just play Atticus Finch, he was him. In quiet ways, in brave ways, in real life, in an industry that rewarded silence, most stayed quiet. They followed the script, hit their marks, and let injustice pass behind the camera. But a few didn't. They weren't perfect. They weren't saints. They were actors, artists, public figures with the rare courage to use their spotlight for something bigger than themselves. They stood up when it was unpopular, spoke out when the room got quiet, and pushed back, gently or loudly, when it would have been easier to just smile and say nothing. They didn't do it for applause. They didn't do it for headlines. Most of the time, they did it knowing they'd lose something, a role, a deal, a reputation. But they spoke up anyway, because real allyship doesn't come with trophies. It comes with risk, with sacrifice, with knowing that history might never fully give you credit, but doing the right thing anyway. These were the White Stars who didn't just perform empathy. They practiced it in the quiet moments, on the loudest stages, when it actually mattered. Let their legacy remind us, it's not about being the hero. It's about refusing to be a bystander.